everyone, it's Ocean Unknown and welcome back to my channel. This is the third video in my series where I'm analyzing every single Danganronpa execution. So today, we're talking about all the executions in the third game, Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. This series is inspired by Weepy News, who did a series with this topic a few years back, but I wanted to share my thoughts on the Danganronpa executions as well. First and foremost, this video will contain massive spoilers for the first, second, and third Danganronpa games, so as always, proceed with caution. Also, if this is the content you'd like to see from me and on your page, please make sure to like this video, leave comments, and subscribe to join the SeaBunnies. Without further ado, let's start. The first execution in this game is arguably one of the most detailed and symbolic in the entire trilogy, Der Flohwalzer. But first, we need some context. The person being executed in this execution is Kaede Akamatsu, the ultimate pianist. She's voted as the culprit in Chapter 1, but here's the thing. In Chapter 1, Kaede is the protagonist. As the player, we don't find out she's the culprit until the back half of the Chapter 1 trial, but there is an understandable shock felt when Kaede is revealed as the culprit. She was something completely new for the series as a whole. A female protagonist, a protagonist with an actualized talent, and a protagonist with well thought out dreams and a fully fleshed out personality from the get-go. And all of this makes her death that much more heartbreaking and brutal, and trust me, this execution is arguably the most brutal in the series. For that reason, and because of the specific way she goes out, here is a trigger warning for what happens in her execution, since I know it can be a very sensitive topic for many people, and here's a timestamp if you'd like to skip Kaede's section of this video. Kaede's execution begins with her being dragged up to the ceiling by a metal chain around her neck, which is a callback to the first culprit executions from the first two Danganronpa games. She's then dropped onto a giant piano with an onlooking audience of hundreds of Monokuma as Kaede is dragged up by the neck again, but this time by a noose. The Monokubs hoist her up as Monokuma conducts them to play the piano with Kaede. She is suffocating while playing all the wrong notes as the audience starts to boo and throw stones at her. When Kaede's body stops moving and the performance is finished, the piano, which is covered in spikes on the inside, is slammed shut, crushing Kaede's lifeless body. Like I said, brutal. As far as details and symbolism, Kaede's execution is considered as one of, if not the most despair-inducing executions for countless reasons. Starting off with the name Der Flohwalzer, this is also referred to, especially in the States, as the Flea Waltz, which is a very well-known piano piece and is what Kaede is forced to play during her execution. However, the Flea Waltz is typically one of the first pieces piano players learn and is considered one of the easiest piano pieces ever. So Kaede being forced to play a song that she likely performed in her childhood and to play it A, out of her control, and B, horribly, makes this experience 1,000,000 times worse for her. There's also a common interpretation of this execution that interprets Kaede's execution as an allegory for stage fright, as the feeling of messing up in front of people can be compared to a choking feeling. The song choice also aids in all the foreshadowing in this execution. See, here's the thing. Kaede isn't actually the culprit of the Chapter 1 case. We are led to believe that she is, but Chapter 6 reveals that the mastermind of the killing game was actually the culprit, and thus, Kaede was convicted and brutally executed for no reason. This reveal is hinted at throughout Kaede's execution, including with the Flea Waltz. Noticeably, Kaede is only on the white keys of the piano, but the Flea Waltz is mostly played on the black keys. In the Danganronpa series, the culprit is often called the Blackened, so this artistic choice serves as a hint that Kaede isn't the real culprit. Also, this piece was attributed to someone who wasn't the composer, just like how Kaede got executed despite never committing any crimes. In addition, the promo video foreshadows the first 3 causes of death in the game, with the second being death by hanging for Kaede. Going back to the execution, there are little details that hint at the other 5 culprits and executions in the game. The thorns represent Kurumi, either the roses or the rope represent Kurekyo, the caterpillar is for Gonta, the podium on the top of the piano is meant to look like the rocket in Kaido's execution, and Kaede getting crushed at the end foreshadows how Samugi dies at the end of the game. Speaking of Samugi, who is the real culprit of Chapter 1, she's noticeably in the back of the group, likely to hide her more sinister and sadistic expression after seeing Kaede get executed, and knowing that she just got away with murder. Going back to the little trinkets on top of the piano, there's also a clear Alice in Wonderland motif happening with the roses and thorns, caterpillar, playing cards, the clock, and also Kaede falling onto the piano. Personally, I think this nod to Alice in Wonderland further drives home the fact that Kaede was the protagonist of the story, and also hinting at the big reveal of Danganronpa as a whole being an elaborate fictional story. Furthermore, on the despair of of Kaede's execution. There's been a lot of debate within the fandom of how long her execution actually is, with the most common answers being anywhere between 8 hours and 10 hours. Either way, that is an excruciating amount of time for someone to be strangled, continuously pulled from the neck up and down, and hit with stones. Everything about this execution, from the supposed length, the cause of death, to how everything pertains to Kaede as a character, was taken into consideration to make this cater to Kaede and what would give her the most despair. Especially when you consider the fact that Kaede could have potentially left the killing game after killing Rentaro due to the first blood perk, but chose not to take it. Although, to be honest, I feel like Tsumugi wouldn't have let that happen since Kaede didn't actually commit the crime, but anyway. I feel like that's another huge part of why Kaede's execution is so brutal. She could have chosen to be more immoral and selfish, but didn't, and thus she's punished for that as a means to destroy hope amongst the other students. During a free time events, she mentions how one of her dreams was to make music for video games and to hold a big concert so she could perform her original music, and her execution is a big concert. Also, if you take into consideration the everything is fiction plot twist of V3, you can see this through a meta interpretation as well. Adding to the fictional aspect of V3, there's also an interpretation that the dolls on the piano represent other possible characters during the many seasons of Danganronpa that were the ultimate pianist and were executed using this same exact execution. It's also clear in the many interactions we have with Kaede in the story and in her free time events that pretty much her entire life has been dedicated to learning piano and becoming an incredible piano player. Because Kaede is executed via a piano, the thing she loves most in the world, this is a reversal of the other first culprits in the series, which could also potentially be foreshadowing that she was never the culprit to begin with. Sure, Leon and Teru's executions were catered to their ultimate titles, but not who they are, as Leon hated baseball practice and then died via a batting cage, and Teru hated junk food and got deep fried. Kaede's execution truly highlights her love of playing the piano, which makes her despair so much more sentimental and heartbreaking. Lastly, she emphasizes how her main motivation for playing piano and becoming better at it is to make people happy, and in her final moments, she is booed and stoned to death for her playing. Next is Kurumi Tojo's execution, Strand of Agony. First of all, right before her execution, Kurumi, the ultimate maid, does something that nobody in the whole series has ever done before. Kurumi tries to run away from her execution.
For my nation, for my people, I will not die!
But first, context! The motive for Chapter 2 is that the students are given videos to remind them of their loved ones and motivations as a way to incite another murder to happen. However, Monokuma mixed up all the videos, but out of sheer coincidence, Kurumi was the only one to receive her own motive video. Kurumi's video revealed that before the killing game, she was serving as the de facto Prime Minister of Japan, and she was the only person who could save the country from an impending doom. The motive video made Kurumi believe that a horrible event would happen to the citizens she was serving as the de facto Prime Minister, which motivated her to attempt to escape the killing game. After she is voted correctly as the culprit, she makes a run for it before her execution can begin, but as she is attempting to run, Monokuma starts her execution. Strand of Agony starts with Kurumi running away, as protesters crowd around her with signs that say "Notice to quit." A thorny vine drops in front of Kurumi, and despite the aching pain of the thorn stabbing into her hands, she climbs the vine. The protesters throw their signs at her as she climbs up the tunnel, but circular saws emerge and start to spin. Kurumi, determined as ever to escape, continues to climb as the saws cut into her clothes and body. She continues to climb the vine despite the excruciating pain and exhaustion, and she believes she has reached the top and found a way out of the killing game. However, what she thought was the exit was a simple drawing of the sky, as the vine snaps and Kurumi plummets down the tunnel, falling to her death. If Kaede and Kurumi's executions prove anything, it's that V3's executions are extra brutal compared to the other games in the series, and they also feature a lot of connections to the characters and their motivations. As Kurumi was serving as the de facto Prime Minister of Japan, she was under the impression that everyone in her country was depending on her, and she caused herself to constantly be under massive levels of stress and scrutiny, which is evidently shown in the amount of pain she endures during her execution. The protesters are actively shaming her for murdering Ryoma, but also for abandoning her country. The notice to quit on their signs refer to how landlords give their tenants notices when they are forced to move out, which means that they are denouncing Kurumi as their prime minister because of her actions, which gives Kurumi more despair since her her citizens mean everything to her. Kurumi often gets caught up in her own way and her expectations of herself, especially in regards to her feeling as though she needs to serve and please everyone and go above and beyond for everyone else, which directly impacts how she ends up leaving the story. She felt as though she was disappointing her people by being stuck in the killing game without doing anything, but her execution makes her feel ashamed for taking action. However, one could argue that Kurumi, despite her believing that all of her actions are in the best interest of her citizens, was actually quite selfish when it came to her plan, which segues into the main reference in Kurumi's execution. Strand of Agony is based off of the short story The Spider's Thread by Rinosuke Akuragawa. A cool little detail is that Kurumi's design features spider and web motifs. Hell, the cracks that form due to her hitting the ground form a spider web, and in one of her free time events, she mentions how one of her most recent clients was an author, which foreshadows her execution and the inspiration behind it. The story follows a criminal named Kandata who is in hell and has only one good deed to his name, sparing a spider. Buddha gives Kandata the opportunity to get out of hell for his good deed by bringing down a spider's thread for him to climb. Kandata almost makes it to heaven, but he sees other people climbing the thread and screams at them to get off. However, the second he yells at them, the thread snaps and Kandata is stuck in hell once again. Kurumi's execution is clearly inspired by the spider's thread with a slow and agonizing ascension and the inevitable downfall, but also because of Kurumi's selfishness and duality to her character. Chapter 2 emphasizes this duality even with the title, A Thin Line Divides Heaven and Hell, which also references the short story. Also, duality is a major aspect of Danganronpa, with the over-exaggerated, campy style mixed with the gory, bleak subject matter, and of course, the themes of hope versus despair. And Kurumi and her execution perfectly exemplified the duality and themes of the story. She focuses on servitude and selflessness so heavily that she becomes selfish, and she is given the hope of escaping the killing game in her execution, but has it stripped away from her in mere seconds as she falls in despair. Lastly, a fun detail is that the scene of Kurumi running away right before her execution starts is meant to look like how Leon looked in Danganronpa 1 when he is voted correctly as the culprit and realizes he's going to be executed. I interpret this reference to Leon as a hint towards the Chapter 6 reveal, as Kurumi, like Leon, was the first correctly convicted culprit of their respective games. Next is Chapter 3's execution, Cultural Melting Pot. Korekiyo Shinguchi, the ultimate anthropologist, is tied up from the ceiling as he is spun rapidly and grows dizzy. The ropes are cut as he falls into a different room and into a boiler, as he is boiled alive. Before this next section of Korekiyo's execution, here is a trigger warning for an aspect of Korekiyo's character and execution and the timestamp for if you'd like to skip this part. Right before his execution, Korekiyo tells everyone that he is content with the outcome of everything because he will be reunited with his dead sister, with whom he had a romantic relationship with. After being boiled alive, Korekiyo is shown in the afterlife reuniting with his sister, but before they can embrace, Monokuma, who is dressed as an omyoji, or a person in Japan who can communicate with spirits, throws salt on Korekiyo's ghost, which is traditionally used in Japanese folklore to cast away evil spirits. His sister joins in until Korekiyo's spirit is completely exorcised, in which an interesting detail is that it appears that Korekiyo's sister is wearing a glove when she first throws the salt, thus meaning that she is also an evil spirit. As we learn in the Chapter 3 trial in Korekiyo's free time events, his sister was a massive part in his life, as she's part of the reason he became an anthropologist and why he looks the way he does. Thus, the most despair-inducing end for Korekiyo is for the person he admired the most and the person who caused him to accept his fate to destroy all of his hope for being in the afterlife. This execution has a lot to do with other aspects of Korekiyo's character, so let's talk about that. First of all, the Japanese name of this execution translates to Picture Scroll of Punishments Past and Present, as Korekiyo's execution consists of different torture methods used throughout history. The first is the reverse shrimp tie, which was used in the Edo period of Japan, and this also connects with a story he tells Soichi in his free time events where he got tied up during one of his fieldwork sessions, and this led to his interest in the afterlife. The second reference is how the man holding a katana releases Korekiyo, which is similar to seppuku, a form of capital punishment for samurai who have committed serious offenses where they are disemboweled and then decapitated. Since Korekiyo killed not just one but two students in the killing game, and countless more outside of the main story, this form of punishment makes sense as he has committed a serious offense. Lastly, death by boiling was a state state-approved method of execution for severe criminals during the Edo period, thus continuing the theme of Korekiyo's execution being fitting for him both as an anthropologist and as a heinous criminal. Also continuing on with the theme of connecting these executions with past ones from the series, many Danganronpa fans have made connections between Korekiyo's execution and the other Chapter 3 executions, with Korekiyo being enveloped in fire like Celeste, excited to see someone he loves in death like Mikon, and content with his execution like both of them. Following that is Chapter 4's execution, Wild West Insecticide. Gonta Gokuhara, the ultimate entomologist, is tied to a wooden post in a Wild West setting along with a laptop. For some context, Chapter 4's murder took place in a virtual reality that the victim of this case, Miu Iruma, created. Due to a small technical difficulty, Gonta doesn't remember anything from the virtual reality, including him killing Miu. The laptop is all of his lost memories from the virtual reality in an alter ego, which is a lovely callback to alter ego in the first two games, and alter ego's execution in the first game also being in Chapter 4. Monokuma, dressed as a sheriff, begins to shoot robotic wasps at Gonta as he swells up from the stings. Now I have to discuss something I've been avoiding, for good reason, to talk about. The Monocub subplot. So in this game, Monokuma has 5 cubs, and during the first 3 executions, one of them dies. Monokid in Chapter 1, Monosuke in Chapter 2, Monodam in Chapter 3. In Chapter 4, Monophony is giving birth while Gonta is getting stung repeatedly by the wasps. The baby emerges from Monophony's stomach, and it's a gigantic mantis-like wasp. After killing both of the remaining Monocubs, the mantis flies towards Gonta and stabs him and the laptop with its pincer, as Monokuma whips out a flamethrower and sets Gonta, the mantis, and the post on fire. First and foremost, why the Wild West setting for the ultimate entomologist? Well, a huge part of Gonta's character is that he wants to be a gentleman, hence the suit, but he isn't very adjusted to modern civilization since he was raised by wolves. During their interactions with him, both Suichi and Kaede referred to Gonta as wild, which could be seen as the answer to the Wild West setting, plus the concept of a gentleman cowboy. Moreover, the Japanese title of Gonta's execution is Bug's Panic, which is also the English title of the film Infestation, a comedy horror film about killer bugs. Along with Infestation, Gonta's execution is also inspired by Alien, especially with how the giant bug emerges from Monophony's stomach. Lastly, with the references, Gonta's execution also references 2 other executions from past games, this time being Leon and Teru's executions, since all 3 executions include the culprits being tied to a pole and being pelted with something related to their talents. I personally interpret this connection to Danganronpa as the fictional show within the video game series running out of ideas. Wait until we get to Chapter 5's execution. The overkill of Gonta's execution is also possibly a reference to the unnecessary measures of alter ego's execution in the first game as well. Now for the despair part of this execution, of course there's the obvious part, which is that Gonta's favorite thing, bugs, killed him. However, there's even more details to how this execution is designed to give Gonta the most despair possible. The music that plays during his execution has lyrics that say, "I'm at the bottom of the ocean, I'm at the bottom of the sea, I don't know if I'll make it back home, I'm just stuck in a dream." These lyrics convey the dreary feeling of Gonta's execution and how he knows in this moment that he is about to die. As for the bugs, it's important to note that the bugs used to kill Gonta are mechanical. You could say they're computer bugs. As implied with Gonta's backstory and the events of Chapter 4, Gonta never really understood technology and how it works, especially because of the fact that Gonta lost his memory of the virtual reality in Chapter 4 because he mixed up the chords. By using robotic bugs to hurt him, Monokuma is actively mocking Gonta and his lack of modern intelligence. Also, Gonta's execution is noticeably brutal in an extensive way. This execution is intentionally overkill because it sets up for Chapter 5's execution and everything that happens with it. The ending shot of Monokuma laughing at Gonta burning is completely intentional, as it shows how much Monokuma enjoys making these students feel despair and making them absolutely miserable in life and death. Chapter 5's execution plays into this excessiveness and despair of Monokuma's actions and the overall themes and plot points of V3, and Chapter 4 is the build-up for all the pandemonium that occurs in Chapter 5. Lastly, a very interesting detail is that Gonta's execution is hinted at all the way back in Chapter 1. Gonta tells everyone that he watched a bug movie to motivate himself, and Tsumugi asks him something along the lines of, "Did you imagine yourself as a giant mantis with knives for arms?" Since Tsumugi is the mastermind and was a staff of Team Danganronpa, she was planning out the narrative of this story, including Gonta's execution right then and there. However, what happens when the narrative goes a way that the writers never intended? Which is the perfect segue to Chapter 5's execution, Blast Off, Second Ignition. Kaido Momota, the ultimate astronaut, is placed in a rocket. How fitting for his talent! Except, the rocket starts drilling into the ground and going into the Earth's crust. The rocket keeps going through the ocean, sky, and Kaido eventually makes it to space. For some context of what's about to happen, it is revealed at the end of Chapter 3 that Kaido has been suffering from an unknown terminal illness that causes him to cough up blood. Before his execution, Kaido told Monokuma that he wasn't going to die how he wanted him to, and he would go out on his own terms. When he reaches space, he coughs up a lot of blood, succumbing to his illness and dying with a smile in space. Because Kaido died from his illness and not his intended execution, which deems this execution a failure as the rocket plummets down. Monokuma, being bested by the participants, especially Kaido, in both the trial and execution, is furious. First of all, this isn't the first time we've seen this execution.
Played these games before! I said I played these games before!
Kaido's execution is nearly identical to the very first execution in the series, Jin Kirigiri's execution, Blast Off, thus the second ignition part of the title. In an ironic twist, the first execution and the last official execution in the series are the exact same concept. This creates a full circle moment and also plays on the idea I mentioned earlier about Team Danganronpa intentionally running out of ideas and foreshadowing the reveal that the Danganronpa series in the world of the game is a TV show with over 50 seasons. Also connecting Kaido's execution with other executions in the series, Kaido isn't tied up like Jin Kirigiri was, and this could possibly be a callback to how Kyoko and Makoto weren't restricted to their chairs during their executions, and all of these happened in Chapter 5 of their respective games. With the drilling through the earth part of this execution, it's possible that this could be a reference to Kazuichi Soda's unused execution where he is also drilled into the Earth's core, which is even more ironic considering Kaido and Kazuichi have the same English voice actor. However, Kaido was also taken underground to give him even more despair. Despite being the ultimate astronaut, Kaido has never been to space before, and it has always been his biggest dream to go to space. By giving him the illusion that he's going to space in a rocket but then taking him the opposite way, Monokuma wanted Kaido to suffer. On the other hand, Kaido in the end got everything he wanted before dying. He got to finally go to space, he died on his own terms from his illness instead of the execution, and he resisted the killing game in his own way by not giving Monokuma any satisfaction through his execution. Monokuma was so upset that everything didn't go according to plan, which completely contrasts his jovial expression after Gonta's execution. Also, another detail is that the only student who looked shocked at Kaido's execution failing is Tsumugi, further pointing to her as the mastermind. Well, now it's time to talk about her execution and the final execution of V3 and the whole Danganronpa series, Ultimate Annihilation. Since Tsumugi and Monokuma are forced to end Danganronpa because of the other students refusing to play along with the TV show, Tsumugi trusts Kibo, the traitor in eyes of the audience, also the best character in this game, but that's besides the point, to execute her and Monokuma as a way to end the franchise with a bang. Tsumugi and Monokuma want to be executed because they can't imagine a world without the franchise, and thus, Kibo initiates their executions and the destruction of the Ultimate Academy. As Tsumugi is the ultimate cosplayer and spent the entire 6th trial cosplaying as all of the characters from the past 2 games, she starts off her execution cosplaying as Junko, who she is extremely obsessed with. She does the iconic Junko wave, but noticeably, her facial expression is different from Junko's while she's doing the wave. Tsumugi's face is more similar to the one Junko has while she's getting closer to the trash compactor at the end of her execution. There's a lot of moments like this throughout Chapter 6 where Tsumugi is cosplaying as Junko, and this symbolizes how no matter how hard she tried, Tsumugi could never become Junko and was always going to be stuck as her plain self. While Kibo is destroying the academy, Tsumugi switches back to herself, looking incredibly sad and filled with despair as she waves, and a giant boulder crushes her and Monokuma. Now, as I've mentioned, death by crushing is reserved for important characters in the Danganronpa series like Junko, Kyoko, Chiaki, and Kaede, and it does make sense for Tsumugi to be crushed since she is the mastermind of V3. However, I'd like to believe it's intentional that we don't see Kibo being involved in Tsumugi's death specifically. Tsumugi was intended to die during her execution, sure, but this boulder crushing her was mere coincidence and was unimportant, without substance or identity. just like Samuki. She got crushed just like Junko, her biggest inspiration, did, but her death was a simple and drab imitation of Junko's, and I think that was absolutely intentional on the writer's behalf. Kibo continues to destroy the academy as he sees 3 rocks move, showing him that the other students are alive and safe as he pushes his self-destruct button and destroys the academy and Danganronpa once and for all. And that's all I have for you today. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to this channel to join the SeaBunnies, and turn on the bell for notifications. Comment down below your thoughts and opinions about Danganronpa V3's executions or these characters, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you so much!